And good evening, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Current Events on Tap, a podcast brought to you by the Alex Kirsch Project, where, like the drinks, the current events are on the house. And I'm your host, Alex Kirsch, pragmatic progressive, U.S. Army veteran, truck driver, gamer, and streamer. If this is your first time on the show, please do not forget to hit like, share, and comment, and subscribe. We are currently streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and the X platform. The format of this show is simple. I bring on one or more guests onto the show. We talk beer or beverage of choice and the current events of the week. Each person will discuss their beverage of choice for this hour, whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic. It does not matter. Then each person will cover two current events of their choosing. They give the current event, they give their assessment, but each person gets a chance to give their assessment, and then we discuss it. Debate may be possible, but rest assured, you are in a good faith zone, and you will get your chance to get your point across. The point of this space is for all of us to discuss the issues, what we think of it, and keep an open mind to what the other person has to say. And please remember to keep it within TOS. Without further ado, let's welcome our guest this evening from the YouTube channel Pondering Politics, Jessiah. What's going on, sir?
Hey, Alex, I appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here and looking forward to talking politics.
Certainly. You mind telling us about your YouTube channel where we can find you?
Sure. It's youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics, one word. I'd say the general thesis of the channel is, we talk about electoral politics, political history, political theory. So we could be discussing how incompetent and ineffective the Republican majority in the House of Representatives are, or we could talk about the necessity of Supreme Court reform, so more, constitutional structural issues. But generally speaking, I consider myself also a pragmatic progressive. I think the Republican Party is an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle and no talent for or interest in responsible governance. And I think Democrats should continue to win elections, coalition build, and then ruthlessly seek and wield power against this modern GOP. They would do it to us. They have done it to us, and their ideas are considerably worse and less popular. So I think Democrats have a responsibility to actually leverage the power that they get instead of just hoping that the GOP, becomes more reasonable. They're not gonna.
Certainly. Not until certain ideologies, like the MAGA ideology, kind of goes away. But the first time 100%. I actually caught one of your channels was when you were on one of Wick's panels, and then actually started watching some of your content. And I really thought it was interesting you were able to talk to Luke Beasley. I like his content as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a good buddy of mine. He was actually, even though he's considerably younger than I am, if I have two mentors in the space, in the sense of people who were in a more advanced position and have helped me out. Luke Beasley is one and Destiny is the other. Luke definitely, in terms of, making recommendations in terms of to crack the algorithm and stuff like that, he's been enormously beneficial. He's a good friend. He was actually, because I live in Charlotte, he was actually here in Charlotte with me probably a couple of weeks ago and met a bunch of my friends and family to celebrate my birthday and stuff like that. So that's how tight we are. Yep. Yeah, great guy, sharp awesome guy. And his channel's blowing up even more than mine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and before we kind of get into what our beverages this evening are, I really appreciate the fact that he's, when he goes out to talk to people, especially people on the other side, he's always very calm and collective, and he's, he just keeps it together. Some good people are good. I'm terrible at that. I'm still trying to figure that out, but he just has that knack for it. So.
No, yes. So he and another guy named Adam Mockler are really good at maintaining their poise in the face of high tense situation. Luke has the zen and poise of somebody much older than him. He's a 90-year-old packed into a much younger body. The dude is just chill. It takes a lot to work him up is in public, so MAGA is simply no match for his restraint.
Gotcha. Anyway, do you have a beverage of choice, alcoholic, non-alcoholic?
So if it had been later in the day, I would have had an alcoholic beverage, but right now I'm on my second Monster for the day, so it's a Monster Zero Ultra. But I'm happy to chat about the alcoholic beverages. So my alcoholic beverage of choice is usually a Tito's and tonic with lime, so vodka tonic. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I'm kind of a beer drinker, but I won't turn away a good rum. I'm all about the rum, but having lived in Germany, I became a real beer snob. Let's put it that way. I drank so much beer. So let's just say that I drank a lot of beer in Germany, and I couldn't even scratch the surface. But I always judge a beer based upon if you can drink cold or warm. I mean, room temperature, that is. So, but tonight I'm not going to be drinking any alcoholic beverages. Not feeling 100%, but I'm going to be hydrating myself tonight with some water and liquid IV. I bought the liquid IV at Costco. Honestly, it's good because I drink a lot of Pedialyte at one point, but it's so expensive But Liquid IV, this one actually has caffeine inside of it, so it kind of gives that boost because, I do a lot of hard labor work, and it kind of gives me the boost that I really need. So, and I figured, but what better use it for today's discussion?
Yeah, so with beer, I also drink like a lot of beer, both domestic and craft beer, and even international as well. I never thought I would when I first started drinking because I believe this. I genuinely believe this. I think anyone who looks at you with a straight face the first time they have their first beer and say, "I love this," I think they're lying through their teeth. It tastes like aluminum foil put in a blender, right? It's bitter. I think I had an IPA the first beer I had, and then over time, I mean, it's true. Your palate does change. So with liquor. I'm much more limited in terms of what I can tolerate because even though I live most of my life in Kentucky, I hate bourbon. That was the first liquor I shot was Booker's bourbon. It's like cask strength, 130 proof. Yeah. And so like if I smell bourbon, it's just like instant goosebumps, and I go to some sort of like traumatic place. But like beer, you mentioned German beer, so I love like a good Hefeweizen. In terms of like other beer I drink, I love a Modelo or Yingling. Would be a good one. Yeah, Yingling's good. And then Stella Artois is another one too. So that are kind of like my go-to. I used to love a good Blue Moon if you had the orange slice in it, but without it, it's just not as refreshing in my opinion.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. There's a lot of good ones, and I could talk beer all day, but how about we go ahead and get into current events, because I know you got a pressing matter to get to eventually.
Absolutely. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so first current event. Last week, the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash. As of right now, no foul play is suspected. From what experts believe is that the helicopter, in very severe weather conditions, made what is called a hard landing. The conditions only worsened, which made any rescue attempts difficult, if not impossible. Now, for those not aware, President Raisi was just a teenager when the Islamic Revolution kicked off and gave power to all the Islamic theocrats. And after a career as a prosecutor and a judge, he had faced multiple sanctions, very hard sanctions from the U.S. for his involvement of mass execution of prisoners in 1988, which the number was believed between anywhere from 2,800 to 3,000 people, essentially. Some believe the number could actually be higher. He campaigned and won the office of president in 2017 against Hassan Rouhani, and for those not aware, he was actually in charge of the Iran nuclear deal that was brokered during the Obama administration, which then Trump canceled, pulled us out of. He is known for tightening the morality laws, which we all remember the story of Mahsa Amini in 2022, the Iranian woman who was apparently beaten to death for not wearing her hijab. Now, mass protests spread across the country and led to the deaths of an additional 500 people and over 202,000 detentions. Now, President Biden offered his condolences to the country of Iran, which sparked mass criticism for his consolation. Now, we must all remember, Iran is not an ally, they are an adversary. The Iranian government is not only known to be just corrupt, but they tend to thumb their nose at the United States. They've also been known to send drones to Russia to use against their war against Ukraine, who the United States, along with other of our allies, are helping them in that fight. Now, I reached out to a geopolitical expert, I think you'd like this guy, who has spent time in Iran, and on this matter and asked him, what's next? He stated, well, Iran's going to have an election. Right now they have the vice president that's in charge right now, and the hardliners are more likely going to win again, and someone is probably going to be even harsher than Raisi. Now, some have speculated that Israel may use this time to strike back at Iran because they're kind of at a weak point, but as of right now, nothing is happening. The current acting president, like I said, is Vice President Mohammed Mokhber. I probably butchered that name, but oh well. So, Jessiah, what are your thoughts about the current situation regarding that?
Yeah, so full disclosure, foreign policy is not my bailiwick. I focus more on domestic policy. I will tell you that obviously I didn't shed a tear when Raisi died, and I was just superficially kind of surprised that President Biden issued condolences, but also to be perfectly candid, I didn't read the text of the condolences. Like I remember, for example, when Henry Kissinger, who is, I think, understandably reviled for much of his foreign policy takes over the years, when he died, the president, obviously, President Biden made public statements, but he actually didn't. It wasn't like effuse praise, like my heart breaks for the loss. So it was like a very politically structured statement for somebody who was enormously powerful and influential in U.S. politics and still has his fans, particularly among conservatives. So he basically walked a fine line. I would need to see what Biden said about Raisi as well to kind of to assess it. But yeah, when I saw the headline that he offers his condolences, I was like, I'm kind of surprised about that. But on the other hand, right now we are in multiple geopolitical conflicts, obviously in the Middle East and also with Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And if Biden and the State Department believe that, some condolences, which are carefully worded, might help cool the temperature, at least in terms of Iran's, ire towards us, then that's a small price to pay. But so I would want to understand what the calculus was behind it, because also to your point, we have been trying and failing to get Iran back into some sort of, a nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which Trump took us out of. And every intelligence report which has come out since Trump revoked the JCPOA says that Iran restarted their nuclear weapons program, and they are closer than ever. They've been making gains both under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration.
Yep.
So these people, at the end, I guess I'll say the Biden State Department, no State Department, are idiots. Even if they make the wrong choice, there's usually a sound logic for the decisions they make. So I'm sure they had their reasons for doing what they did with the Racy.
Oh, absolutely. And, I definitely agree with you. Like, I think it's definitely like a consolation, because that's probably expected of him to make a statement, because he is the president of the United States. So everything that every president says is people zero in on that, whether it's positive or negative, right? And I do believe it was just kind of like, not necessarily PR, but it was just like to show a face of some sort. I don't think we're ever going to get back into this. That pretty much got torpedoed essentially after Trump pulls out, because every intelligence expert that you spoke with, or that we've talked about so far, they all stated that they were adhering to the regulations to the Iran nuclear deal. They were only enriching so much uranium for like power and whatnot.
Domestic energy purposes.
Exactly. Yeah. And after we pulled out of it, it basically nixed any deal what we might have had. Now, there's people out there that are saying, oh, well, that they went against the agreement first. I have not seen any proof of that whatsoever. So
no, they've passed every independent inspection that was taking place under the Obama administration. Like,
sure.
There were two types of inspections, if I remember correctly. One involved the United Nations, and the other one involved, I think, a joint task force between the United States and Iran, and I think maybe Germany or another country.
Yep.
And there was no issue based on that the Iran allowed these inspectors in unmolested. They passed the inspections, and yet, to your point, this is the problem with when you have control of the White House swing so wildly. In the White House, they basically control 90% of foreign policy. I mean, there's some formalities where the Senate has to get involved, like the recognition of a treaty. You got to get the advice and consent of the Senate. But basically, I mean, this is where the president's power is at its apex, is with matters of foreign policy and the military. And so when you have such a wild swing from Obama to Trump, to your point, Biden can go back in and say, hey, guys, that wasn't me. That was this asshole or this idiot behind me. You can't blame me for that. What they're coming from this is, yeah, but that's the United States government. You made a commitment. We expected the commitment to go through. And even if you, Joe Biden, will act in good faith, we have no reason to believe that your successor will. So that's the sad thing. Like, it's almost like, what's that meme? The worst person ever finally makes a good point. And it would be tough to justify it.
Absolutely. And, if people think that it would be possible to get back into it, I would kind of like to direct everybody's attention to the time when we abandoned the Kurds in Syria. There's no way for us to get back in the good graces of them either. Now, people could say, oh, well, the Kurds aren't our allies. They were our allies. They were helping spot targets for our bombers against ISIS. They helped us fight against ISIS, and we pretty much bailed on them as well. So this basically just means that, like, in the eyes of the rest of the world, now people say, oh, we shouldn't care what the rest of the world says. We should, actually, because our policy, what we do, people look to the United States on all of our actions, positive or negative. And, people can argue about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Being a veteran, I can tell you it wasn't disastrous, but it was going to be disastrous regardless of who was in office. It's not going to matter because, you can't get out of a country after 20 years and expect it to be, peaches and cream. It's not going to happen. And people just need to be realistic about that. Now, going back to Iran, the reason why is because whatever Raisi probably couldn't get done, the next person in charge, they're probably going to have longevity. It's probably going to be somebody that the hardliners actually accept. And that person just might win re-election, essentially. Who knows? I mean, that's a speculation on my part, though.
Yeah, I mean, I have no reason to be optimistic about U.S. relations with Iran after this, and especially because, I don't know how much this idea is proliferated elsewhere, but of course, the prevailing conspiracy theory for some time was that, the United States killed Raisi. Now, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has emphatically denied that. He said we had nothing to do with that. That could have been mechanical failure or anything else.
Yeah.
So that could also be a motivator to get an even more anti-U.S. hardliner to take Raisi's place, which again, I don't even know about the domestic politics. I assume the vice president will carry out the remainder of Raisi's term. I don't know when they'll do next elections, but yeah, I don't think we have any reason for it to bode well. But yeah, people who say that, we shouldn't care about the rest of the world, these isolationists, they have such again, in foreign policy is not my area of expertise, but just like intuitively, it's such a stupid, facile view. Like the United States, so people think that because the United States is the most powerful nation on earth, that we are totally self-sufficient, both economically and militarily. But the fact of the matter is that we are as dependent as other nations are on us with relationships that we have with one another. That's part of the reason, for example, that we're so concerned about Taiwan and China's aggression against Taiwan because of semiconductor chips, right, which are necessary for not just medical technology, automotive technology, but defense technology and stuff like this too. Like we there's a reason that globalism has been a trend of every major power. We are fully integrated. There's no one ringing that bell. So isolationists just need to keep, make their peace with it. And we have to do everything in our power to be seen as a good faith actor, both by our adversary or our allies, yes, but also our adversaries. They need to know that when we say we're going to do something good or bad, that we will follow through. And because that sort of honesty is a good foundation for a stable relationship.
There's also something else to take into consideration because, I'm a firm believer in like semiconductor technology because, whether we realize it or not, solar, green energy cars are the way of the future, right? Now, I don't have an electric car. I still drive gasoline. But the thing is, though, if another country that, let's say, for example, you've got another country that produces a lot of oil, if that country falls under attack, the price of oil is just going to keep going up. And people need to realize that oil is a global commodity. Just because we are the mass producer of oil right now, that doesn't mean that we use our own oil all the time. We import oil from every country. We've been doing it for decades, maybe even centuries, essentially, for bringing oil in, or like maybe a century. But we've been importing and exporting oil since we discovered it, essentially, to utilize our products and whatnot. Not just to for gasoline products, oil products, but also the plastics and whatnot. It's used for petroleum and whatnot. There's so much that kind of plays into it, but it's people that have the small-minded thinking. It's we could become self-sufficient isolationists. No, we can't. We are a global trading partner with, even our adversaries. We can consider China an adversary. So whatever impact one country might have, we all feel the impact, and people have got to be realistic about that. So,
100%. I mean, there's an economic term called autarky. This idea that a nation state can cut off all economic ties and produce all of the manufactured goods that it needs itself. And so, the United States, I think, is either the first or second most diverse and wealthiest nation in the world in terms of natural resources. I think China's only our only viable peer. In that, in theory, we could do most of the stuff that we need to do. We could do it here, but there's no nation on Earth or in the history of planet Earth that was that engaged in autarky, where they just cut off trade and did everything internally within their borders, and it's self-sustaining. It's just not possible. There's a reason that, again, I think as a general proposition, one of the things that I do is I try to defer to experts. I'm not saying that experts are always right, but I start from the position that if this person is an expert, if I'm going to bet, if I'm going to gamble, I'm going to assume that they're right. Okay. And so to me, it's if all of these nations, not just modern nations, not just modern advanced nations, but nations going back decades and centuries, if they engage in trade with other partners and didn't just try to do everything themselves, there's probably good reason for that. And so anybody saying, no, let's just cut the rest of the world off and do everything within the confines of the continental United States, I just kind of ignore that. That's pretty stupid and vapid.
Absolutely. And, that's why, when it comes to geopolitics, I usually refer to, one person, because, he actually hosts a podcast called the Red Line Podcast. I don't know if you ever heard of it. but he brings on 3 geopolitical experts. Like if he talks about the country of Sudan, he brings on 3 people that actually specialize on that region. Like they are experts on that. And I think you should check it out. I think it's really fascinating. You can learn quite a bit. So
I'll check that out.
Yeah. You want to go move on to your first topic?
Yeah. So my first topic is the situation with the United States Supreme Court. This is kind of this is something that's really important to me because I'm a firm believer that the Supreme Court of the United States is inordinately powerful and inordinately unchecked, and this is further proof of it. So you have conservative Justice Samuel Alito, who was appointed by President George W. Bush. He wasn't a Trump appointee. He was a George W. Bush appointee, who it was reported that in the days after the January 6th insurrection in 2021, there was an inverted flag flown on his flagpole at his home, which is a sign of distress, and it was associated at the time by certain movements sympathetic to Trump's attempts to steal the election. So that story kind of resurfaced, and he was asked about it, and he said, I had nothing to do with it. That was my wife. She was in dispute with a neighbor. Turns out the dispute with the neighbor was because the neighbor was anti-Trump and had an F Trump yard sign up, and that pissed Mrs. Alito off. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not really, exculpatory. It's actually further proof that the Alito household is in bed with Trump. And so the questions, have been going on. Should Alito recuse himself involving cases involving Trump in the 2020 election? Is this proof that the Supreme Court needs to be reformed? And I say yes to both, but particularly the latter. I think the United States Supreme Court needs to be radically changed.
It's gonna be a hard sell because it's not just Alito that I worry about. I also worry about Clarence Thomas because what his wife, her association with the people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th, and he refused to recuse himself. That seems like in a regular criminal trial case, if a judge had any association with, like, for example, a defendant or a victim of the defendant or whatever, or the supposed attacker or whatnot, they would have to recuse themselves. But for some reason, Clarence Thomas refused to recuse himself. Now, when people say, oh, it was the wife, she had a dispute, regardless, optics is everything. Optics can be considered reality. And if he says, oh, no, it's just a neighborly dispute, you're a Supreme Court justice. The Supreme Court justice is supposed to be able to interpret the Constitution and just dictate, like, when a case comes to their level, they're supposed to be, like, determine if this has any bearing, if there's a constitutional, viability behind this. And, there were times like I felt that even with this 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court, I felt at times they've done good things, like when they said, there's no basis for the election being stolen, so we're just going to get rid of this. But there have been times where, like, I felt they've allowed their own personal biases to come in. Now, I've had a couple discussions about this, and the Supreme Court right now is just in complete disarray right now. And I think mostly because it all started, I think, when, who was it? Who was the Supreme Court justice that, like, he passed away, and then they tried to bring in Merrick Garland.
Scalia. Justice Scalia.
Justice Scalia. Well, they tried to bring in Merrick Garland, and Mitch McConnell said, we're not bringing him in. And that basically halted any hope of, like, the Supreme Court moving forward, essentially. But then when Trump comes in, he was able to bring in 3 Supreme Court justices, and some of the things I found interesting was that he didn't initially want Brett Kavanaugh. He actually wanted Amy Coney Barrett for starters, right? But because they picked Brett Kavanaugh, he said, well, listen, I'm going to keep Amy Coney Barrett in my back pocket in the event that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg goes. And that's exactly what happened. But kind of going back to, do I think that the Supreme Court is compromised? I do. I think that the Supreme Court needs to be fair and impartial, even if they have some political leanings. They're not even really supposed to have political leanings, because I think it was the Brown versus Board of Education was... have you read much about that one? Like that one, the Supreme Court? Yeah. One guy that was a moderate was pulled from one side to the next, and he actually went insane because he just couldn't make a decision upon it. And I know that's kind of unfortunate, but I just think, once again, it's okay for them to, like, have, like, Republican or Democratic leanings, but I think that they need to kind of just get rid of that and just focus what the Constitution states and where the precedent lies in this. And as far as, do I think it needs to be changed dramatically? I'd like to ask, what do you mean by, like, change dramatically? Like, expand it?
Sure. So there are a number of options. There's some really good. I actually on Destiny's subreddit, because I don't have a subreddit of my own. I do not want it. I don't want a community. I appreciate the viewers and the support that I have, but I can't imagine the difficulty associated with having like a Discord and a community and stuff like that. So that's the closest one that I'm like tethered to.
Sure.
About a year ago, I went through this whole this effort post on Reddit with links and citations and everything, a breakdown of the history of the Supreme Court, the various changes that have been made to the court. This idea that the court, was just forged from divine hands and it was unchanging. It's not true. So there were the size of the Supreme Court changed at the time of the founding fathers. And there were political games played between President Adams and President Jefferson, two founding fathers. So it's not like, again, that it was constant and then over time people politicized it. It's been an inherently political body from the beginning, changed at the request of various Congresses and presidents to kind of screw the next person coming in, and et cetera and so forth. And it also, at the end of that effort post, it goes into a number of changes that could be made to the Supreme Court. And there are many. So one would be a binding ethics code of conduct. This one, to me, should be the least controversial. I see no good faith reason by anybody to oppose this bill. This idea that the president has ethics requirements imposed on him by Congress, like the emoluments. The president can't accept foreign gifts, without reporting it and getting permission from Congress. Right. Right, stuff like that. Congress also has its own ethics requirements as well, with enforcement mechanisms and consequences. The idea that the United States Supreme Court should not, even though every other court does, state and federal, is insane to me. This idea that, well, listen, we'll just like, hey, gentleman's agreement, we'll just like try to be ethical. No, screw that. If you all are 9 unelected philosopher kings appointed for life and you get to impose your will on the rest of us, as far as I'm concerned, if that's the proposition, you have to be perfect. You can't, whereas president, I would sooner make my peace with a corrupt president than a corrupt Supreme Court justice, because at least we can vote the president out. The president is subject to term limits. There are checks on the president. This idea that you all get this lofty position with no checks and we just have to trust that you'll behave ethically. Nah, screw that. Binding ethics requirements. You have to report every damn dollar. I mean, I think down to the nickel. If I give you 50 cents for you to buy a Coke, you should have to report that to some sort of ethics body, let alone gifts of hundreds of thousands of dollars like what's been reported for Clarence Thomas. Mandatory recusal requirements. I think that if you choose not to recuse yourself in a case where your impartiality might be reasonably questioned, we, citizens or other government bodies, should have the means to file a complaint and say, no, listen, Justice Thomas should have recused himself in this situation, and there should be either an inspector general or there should be a body of other federal judges, retired federal judges, the chief justice of various circuits, where they review these things and say, yes, Thomas should recuse himself for these reasons, or no, Thomas doesn't have to recuse himself for these reasons. But it should be more than just at the justice's discretion. That's one. Yes, you could change the size of the Supreme Court. You could remove certain jurisdictions from the Supreme Court. So Congress has the right to say, hey, Supreme Court, according to Article 3 of the Constitution, they can say you can't review cases that discuss capital punishment or whatever. You can take certain things outside of their jurisdictions. I think term limits, mandatory retirement ages. So like after 18 years, you're kicked off the court or whatever, all sorts of things, supermajority requirements. If you're going to strike down a law made by Congress, you can do that, but it can't be with a 5-4 majority. You need a 6-3 supermajority or a 7-2 supermajority, or needs to be unanimous, whatever. All of these things to kind of check the power of the court. And I would be in favor of any of them or all of them or some combination thereof to varying degrees.
Absolutely. And that just sounds very practical, because that way, especially the checks and balances part, because there does definitely need to be like maybe a third party or somebody that can kind of like, if the Supreme Court kind of gets out of line, there should be somebody that's like, hey, wait a second, what's going on here? Just to kind of make sure that they stay within the confines of their responsibility. I really do think, because like, I think Ketanji Brown Jackson, she reported some of the gifts that she was given.
Yeah.
What was it? One of the other Supreme Court justices.
Probably Kagan and Sotomayor.
Sotomayor, yes, that's who it was.
Yeah.
But for some reason, Clarence Thomas has not. And I remember when last week tonight with John Oliver did a special on that, I just was stunned. I was absolutely just shocked. I tell you, for a guy that's like a comedian, he's probably one of the few people that I watch more than anybody else, just because like he talks about issues that are important that we don't focus on enough. And the fact that he brought that to light just really shows like how corrupted the Supreme Court might actually be. And as far as like Alito's concerned, when you're like in the military, right? If your spouse does something, you're held responsible essentially. That's just the way things are. It's your household. So yeah,
Sure.
in a way he is responsible for like his wife's behavior. And people can say, oh, she's her own individual person, but it's like still, I mean, they've had this conversation probably.
Yeah, no, actually, I did a WIC panel about this the other day, and I really enjoyed it. It was all over the place, but that's because I think this topic could be discussed for hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, I understand some people would say, listen, it's unreasonable to hold the justice responsible for the actions of their adult spouse. And I get that, but that's the point. To me, it's like it is an unreasonable level of conduct, but that's because they're given an unreasonable level of power. Like this is my general proposition is one of the brilliant things about our system is, again, the notion of checks and balances. Mm-hmm. So the problem is checks and balances only seem to work one way when it comes to the United States Supreme Court. And I just refuse to accept that. That is untenable to me. The founding fathers, whether you like them or not, and I know a lot of conservatives and centrists will appeal to the wisdom of the founding fathers. Well, you should know they intended for the judiciary to be the weakest of the branches, not co-equal, yes, separate, yes, important, but the weakest. They explicitly said it, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, that they were supposed to be the weakest of the branches, the least dangerous of the branches, supposed to be the least active branch, in that the vast majority of governance was supposed to be done by Congress and the executive. And number three, that they would be held to superhuman, and I'm being reductive here, but extraordinarily high ethics requirements. Yeah. Yes, the founders intended for a judge, which is what the Supreme Court is, a judge to behave better than a lawmaker politician or a president politician. So that's what I mean. And if that's the proposition that, hey, listen, in exchange for you're appointed for life, you don't have to worry about re-election. You don't have to worry about mandatory retirement ages. You can strike down any law or executive action of the more political branches, the more democratic branches, where we, the people, get to elect our Congress people, our senators, our presidents. You get all that power. But we're just supposed to trust you, and you can just do whatever you want, and we can wag our finger at you, and you can say, well, listen, maybe I'll get around to it. Nah, to hell with that. If you're going to act like a political branch, you should be treated like a political branch, and then we get to force our will on you the way we do with the political branches. If we don't like what a president does, we can vote him out in 4 years. If we don't like what our lawmaker does, if he or she is a member of the House of Representatives, we can vote them out in 2 years. It's 6 years for a senator. We have checks and balances. And unfortunately, the makeup of the Supreme Court and its defenders say the checks and balances work both ways, that the weakest branch is actually the strongest branch. They can strike down laws, they can strike down executive orders, and then nobody can do anything about it. And I just refuse to accept that. If you look at the structure of the Constitution, Congress is meant to be the most powerful branch, period. And number one, they're listed in the first article. There's a reason for that. Number two, the founding fathers say in a republic, the legislature is necessarily, quote, necessarily predominant. And if you even look at checks and balances, so Congress passes a law, the president can veto a law. That's a check on the power of Congress. But what can Congress do? They can override the veto. Can the president override of the veto? No, he can't. Congress has the final say. It's tough. Very few vetoes. Like if you have 10 vetoes, 7 of them remain, right? Because it's tough to override a presidential veto, but it's possible. Congress can impeach presidents and Supreme Court justices and remove them. Can presidents and Supreme Court justices remove Congress? No. So at the end of the day, Congress was always intended to be the most powerful branch. And obviously the president is the most powerful person because all of that executive authority is vested in them. So they are basically a walking branch. But again, this idea it's so insane to me. Like, we're just supposed to trust these people for life, and they don't even have to prove their trust. Like, I'm not married. I'm in a relationship. Are you married?
Yes.
Okay. So just imagine that you tell your spouse, hey, listen, you took this oath to trust me, but I don't have to earn your trust. I don't have to prove the trust. I can behave as sus as possible, and you just better hope that, like, I behave in a trustworthy way. You'd be divorced. She'd divorce you.
Yeah.
So why on earth would we just that's unacceptable to me.
Yeah.
So it's like, and to me, that's the kind of the thing with Alito and Thomas. It's just the brazenness of it. Like, you have every freaking advantage in the world. You have very few checks and balances. You're practically untouchable. And you disrespect us so much that you basically give us the finger with all these scandals. Really?
Yeah.
Nah. So that's why I feel so passionate about this. Like, I think it is both a constitutional necessity, and I also think, just on a personal level, the joy that I would feel at humbling these pricks, I think, is necessary. And the last thing I'll say on this part before I turn back to you is, this is something that goes all ways. I don't think it's just the conservative justice. This should be, these checks and balances would work for all of them, because the liberal justices haven't been perfect. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as the WIC panel pointed out to me, she talked smack about Donald Trump in ways that I thought were honest, but she then didn't recuse herself from certain cases involving Trump when she probably should have. Mandatory ethics requirements would address that issue. It's not just Alito. Thomas, with his gift, there have been times when liberal justices have not perfectly disclosed gifts, and they should. So I think the whole court needs to be reined in pretty ruthlessly.
Yeah, that's a consistent argument to make, because when people will talk about expanding the Supreme Court, right? If the Democrats say expand the Supreme Court and the Republicans say no, we shouldn't do that, and then let's flip the role reversal. Let's say then that the Republicans want to expand the Supreme Court, the Democrats are going to say no about that. It's kind of like a really a ridiculous system, but I think it's just because whoever has the most power at that time, like whoever holds the majority in Congress or the Senate, they're going to be like wanting to get as many Supreme Court justices.
Yeah. Well, can we focus on that for just a second? Because you kind of brought this point up earlier, and I think it's very important. Mm-hmm. The dirty pool that went into the current composition of the U.S. Supreme Court. So to your point, Article 2 says the president can nominate Supreme Court justices and fill vacancies. Barack Obama does that in 2016, his last year in office. It was like in February when Justice Scalia died. So he basically had about a year before he would leave office. And instead of having a hearing for Merrick Garland, Obama's appointee, and just voting no because you didn't think he was qualified or whatever, that's your right. The Senate has the right to tell the president no. They didn't even have a hearing, which, as far as I'm concerned, that goes against the spirit of the Constitution. Checks and balances mean that if you and I, you're the Senate and I'm the president, if I offer a nominee, you have the right to say yes or no. But for you to not even basically have the hearing, to me, it's like, that's not checks and balances. That is you asserting yourself over me. Mm-hmm. And it was in such bad faith. The logic was, well, it's an election year. The next president should be the one to fill the vacancy. Then, to your point, in 2020, months before the election, not a year, months, much closer to the election, ballots had already been technically cast in the 2020 election. Justice Ginsburg dies. And you would think if Mitch McConnell were principled, he'd say, listen, as tempting though it may be, I said in 2016, we don't fill Supreme Court vacancies during an election year. It's an election year. We have to be consistent. What did he do? He gave Democrats the finger and filled the vacancy. And that gave Trump and the Republicans a 6-3 conservative supermajority. That did not do anything to help the Supreme Court's reputation, because that was proof that it had been further politicized. So to your point about, the politics of the Supreme Court, that's another reason why it's not satisfying for me and I'm not sure this is what you were getting at. Maybe it is. I know this is what Wick gets at, and others who say, listen, if we try to reform the court, that's just going to piss off the Republicans, and it's going to be a tit for tat. And it's like, to me, it's almost like telling an abused spouse not to defend themselves against their abuser because, hey, if you block that punch, they're just going to hit you harder next time. We would never accept that in any other circumstance. Right now, the status quo favors Republicans. They have had a 50-year majority on the Supreme Court. It was like 1970 was the last time we had a liberal majority on the court. So, of course, they don't want to do anything to change it. They don't want ethics requirements because why not? The court delivers them reliably the results they want. Any attempt for us to defend ourselves or to assert our rights, yes, will be met with bad faith. As far as I'm concerned, that's not a good reason not to do it. Because what's the alternative? Leaving things the way they are. Well, that advantages the Republicans exceptionally. I reject that. I'm not obligated 50% of this country is not obligated to just sit at a decades-long disadvantage because us in good faith trying to correct that disadvantage will just inspire the bad faith party to react even more. That's ridiculous.
I couldn't agree more, honestly. You made some really, really excellent points. And I kind of, there's a mentality that I heard at one point, when I was in the Army, was that people would make the argument, well, we've always done it this way. And people would be like, why? Isn't there a better way of doing things? And I think that's a very important principle. Just because you've always done things a certain way, it doesn't mean you need to continue it. Now, I'm a firm believer, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. But the system is broken already. The system is very much broken. And I do think that we need some level of reform. And I would be in favor of it regardless of, who has the majority. But I feel like it's the Republicans that won't want to change the majority because they have the 6-3 majority. And let's not forget, when the last Supreme Court justice left, I think it was Justice Roberts that left, they were trying to halt Ketanji Brown Jackson from even beginning the meeting.
Oh no, it wasn't Kennedy, was it? It was Breyer, Justice Breyer.
Breyer, that's
Roberts.
Roberts is still okay. Breyer, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm getting my Supreme Court justice mixed up. Yeah. But they were actually going to say, "Oh no, we got to hold off on getting the Supreme Court justice. We can't go rush into this." It's just seriously. He tried to do it again, but this time, the Senate's like, "Haha, nice try, nice try, bitch." But it ain't going to work this time around. So, but no, it's a really, really important point, and I feel like there's not enough people that know just how. I don't think anybody really understood the impact of the Supreme Court until Roe v. Wade got sent back to the states. That's when people really felt the impact from it. And, people are like, oh, well, it just got sent back to the states. You have no idea how much of an impact for so many women that hurt. Because, now there are women that, are afraid of even leaving their state because there's people that are going to track them down. This is, people can have the argument about, pro-life, pro-choice, but the thing is, the priority of personal responsibility and limited government sent a bill to basically send abortion back to the states, and they basically became autocratic, essentially. They basically want to kind of crack down for the safety of children. It's
you know what's funny about that though?
Mm-hmm.
Here's where it gets really despairing because obviously you're right about the effect that the Dobbs decision, which repealed Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, or overturned, not repealed, the effect that that's had on women across this country. And obviously it's been an enormous political boon to Democrats for the past several election cycles, but that may not be the case this year. Polls show that abortion is not the number one issue for most Americans in 2024. So we may have exhausted that. But a couple of things I want to say. Number one, when Dobbs repealed the decision, Democrats did step up and try to codify Roe protections into law. It passed the House and the president was prepared to sign it, but it had to go through the Senate. And unfortunately, you needed 60 votes to avoid the filibuster. And the Republicans would not give people 10 votes to do it, or 8 or 9 votes to do it. So it failed to make it past the filibuster because Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, or Joe Manchin voted against it, but I think that even if he voted for it, he wouldn't have voted to break the filibuster for it, right? So you couldn't pass it, couldn't get done. But here's the sad thing. If they'd done that, Alex, if they'd managed, if Joe Manchin was like, you know what, let's vote, let's codify this, and I'll also vote to break the filibuster because the Senate can do that. They can vote to pass it on a partisan line. If they'd done that and the president signed it into law, here's where the Supreme Court gets dangerous because the Supreme Court could still strike that law down. They, in the Dobbs decision, they overturned Supreme Court precedent, which they have the power to do. But they also, remember, have the power to strike down statutory laws. The only sort of law that they can never strike down is a constitutional amendment because it's not reviewable by the court. Well, you need a 2/3 supermajority in the House, you need 2/3 supermajority in the Senate, and then you need 3/4 of the states, 3/4, to ratify a constitutional amendment. So there's no telling the next time we'll get an amendment. We've had 27 out of 12,000 attempts, 12,000 literal attempts to amend the Constitution, and we only have 27 amendments. That's how hard it is. So that's why I really want to drive the point home how important it is to change this court, and for Democrats, going back to my original thesis, to leverage and wield power ruthlessly when they have it. Because you can say, well, all we have to do is get Biden reelected, which is going to be tough. Right now, it's a coin flip. We got to keep the Senate, which right now is going to be very tough because we have to defend 8 incumbent seats. Republicans are favored to take the Senate, and we have to take back the House, which is the most likely thing of the three. But we got to do all three.
Yep.
Law to codify Roe protections, but then it still has to go up against the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court could also decide, no, we're striking it down because it violates the Constitution. That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I want your viewers to understand, if politics is a video game, we Democrats, we on the left, are playing the game on the hardest difficulty with you're a Halo gamer, like boost enemy HP and increase the number of enemies. Like it is the sheerest of rock climbs. And that is why I'm begging people who say that they're on the left or that they're liberals or progressives, do not make this incredibly difficult job harder.
Mm-hmm.
Your first thought every day, if you genuinely believe the things you do, is how do I make it easier? Mm-hmm. So that's what another beef I have with people who say, don't change the court because you're gonna cause issues with it. Like, no, that if we don't change the court, then it will make a near impossible job even closer to impossible. And I just refuse to accept that. So we have to win these elections, and then we have to elect people who are willing to rein this court in, because even if we do all three things that I just mentioned, the Supreme Court could still strike down a law codifying Roe, which means we need to change the court.
There's a lot of stuff that you told me that I had no idea about. Like, I knew there was a lot of people that tried to make changes to the Constitution or amendments. I didn't know it was that many, though. It's insanity. Yeah, that was very informative. Thank you so much for your insight. I do appreciate that. I mean, I'm learning a lot right now, actually, so I do appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. Yeah, and like I said, hopefully your viewers can really, if they're eligible voters in your audience, that's something to consider. Look, Democrats are not perfect, and I'm sure people have their issues with, right now, a lot of people have issues with President Biden's policy with respect to Israel, Gaza. I understand that.
Yep.
But I also, you need to have a complete understanding or as much of a complete understanding as possible of all the stakes. Absolutely. It's not just Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. It's also a lot of stuff here at home and in ways that we don't even think. Because again, I know so many people who are like, all we have to do is just win these elections. We'll codify Roe protections, and that'll protect women in this country. Really, not if the Supreme Court wants.
Yeah.
Not if the Supreme Court wants.
Especially in the state I live in. I live in Michigan. It's going to be really hard for Biden because, especially in places like Dearborn, very, very big Muslim population. And I'm pretty sure you saw on Mehdi Hassan's channel, he had the mayor of Dearborn on there. And he's already said he's not going to vote for Biden. And, I understand his reasoning behind it. But, Keith Ellison brought some really solid points into it. And even Mehdi Hassan has said, even if you don't vote for Biden, guess who you might have to deal with if he takes office again? And he's not going to show you any love whatsoever. And that's just, it's such a hard sell. And I understand why it's a hard sell, but it's just, we got to do our part and just say, listen, I understand how you feel. I'm not trying to condescend to you whatsoever, but it's just it
is. It's a really tough. It's funny you mentioned that because I love that conversation that he moderated between the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, and Attorney General Ellison, because I actually participated in a Q&A with Mehdi Hassan a few days after that.
Yep.
And I asked him, I referenced that debate, and I'm like, because what I hear a lot is, we're going to punish Biden. We'll punish Biden. And I asked Mehdi Hassan this, and I was glad he gave the answer he did. And obviously, Mehdi Hassan has been outspokenly critical of the president.
Yeah.
And I think also very rationally, too, recognizes Trump would be worse. But I was so happy, and I'm looking forward to, I think I'll be interviewing him in mid-June, and I want to explore this more.
Awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah, because he's my favorite mainstream progressive political commentator, so I'm really excited. He said, ridiculous, you're not going to punish Biden. If Biden loses the election, he's going to leave office with Secret Service protection, a multimillionaire with government health insurance, government stipends, and for 4 years, he would have been the most powerful man on earth. So that's not, if that's a punishment, sign me up for it, right? I want that punishment. You're not going to punish him. You might bruise his ego for a couple of months, but that's it. You're not going to make him poor. You're not going to take away the privileges of being an ex-president. You're not going to take away his fame and celebrity. What you might very well do by allowing Trump to win is making things considerably worse for everyone else in this country and the people of Palestine, the people in Gaza as well. So that's at the end of the day, as callous as it is, there is no rational argument for allowing Trump back in the White House. None. I support and I've said this before, I support not only the right of the uncommitted movement, I support the uncommitted movement leveraging their vote, trying to pressure Biden, saying, Mr. President, I will vote for you, but I need you to do X and Y first. That's civic engagement. That's leveraging power. But for people to say, like Anna Kasparian and others, that I will not vote for Joe Biden no matter what, that is dangerous and stupid, because you're forfeiting your leverage and you are rolling out the red carpet, whether you want to admit it or not, for somebody who is objectively worse even on that issue. Benjamin Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir have publicly expressed support for a second Trump presidency, which means the leaders of Israel that you believe, are committing, many people believe are committing genocide. If you believe that, the leaders conducting that genocide want Trump instead of Biden. Why? Because clearly he must be meaningfully more important and useful to them. So even if this is your single issue, Biden is still better than Trump. It's not even a wash. He's just better than Trump. So that's the frustrating thing.
I 100% agree. So yeah. Again, this was a really good topic, and I appreciate your insight very much. You ready to move on to the next one? Because I know our time is kind of short.
Please. So. Yeah. No, go ahead.
All right. So on May 21st, it was released to the mainstream media that FBI agents who executed the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago were given the green light that deadly force was authorized. Now, certain media figures on the right insist that this was a direct threat against Trump himself. And even Trump insisted that Biden was trying to send a death squad to assassinate him. Now, his quote on Truth Social said as follows: "Wow, I just came out of the Biden witch hunt trial in Manhattan," which is the Stormy Daniels case, "the Icebox, and was shown reports that crooked Joe Biden's DOJ in their illegal and unconstitutional raid of Mar-a-Lago authorized the FBI to use deadly, lethal force. Now we know for sure that Joe Biden is a serious threat to democracy. He is mentally unfit to hold office. 25th Amendment." Now, other partisan hacks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I call Marjorie Trader Greene, insist that this was an attempted assassination attempt on Trump. Now, what people don't realize is that this is a standard operating procedure. If you send an entire FBI raid to any location, they're not going to show up with a singing telegram, and they're not going to ask for a cup of sugar. It's expected that they're going to show up with a full tactical team in full kit, full body armor, helmets, the full huzzah, and they'll be briefed on rules of engagement just like any other standard military unit. Now, while any person with a lick of common sense would know that nobody is going to start a gunfight at Mar-a-Lago, it's not the OK Corral. Even Trump's Secret Service would open fire on the FBI. Now, no matter how loyal they might be. Now, Trump had absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, why did he share this? It's that simple. Exposure. He loves this. He lives for it. He loves the limelight. And I can say without a doubt, Trump knew he wasn't in any danger. Whatever he says, though, his base is going to believe. This is what it got him. It got him the exposure, and this is exactly what he likes. Now, people on social media platforms like the X platform, which is becoming more and more radical to the right, they truly believe this. And more people are sharing it and reposting it. And people are losing their minds over this again. Now, again, this is standard procedure, and Trump even once said, nobody is above the law. He said it himself. But for some reason, he seems to think that he is above the law, that nobody should send an FBI tactical team, even though I've gone over this issue so many times with people. Had he just cooperated and returned the documents, this wouldn't have been an issue. Just like they did with Mike Pence, just like they did with President Biden. They said, oops, sorry, we'll return the documents, but Trump refused. Their hands were tied. It was a completely constitutional search. And yes, of course, they're going to have full kit because you don't know what's going to happen. Everybody pretty much figured nothing was going to go down, no gunfight. Trump wasn't even in the same freaking state, for crying out loud. So, Jessiah, what do you think about Trump's most recent meltdown?
Yeah, it's really frustrating because it's a conspiracy theory that began with a sitting member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's being peddled by other sitting members of Congress, including Paul Gosar. You have the ex-president obviously signal boosting it because he's unhinged and it's beneficial to his narrative and he's fundraising off it. And then you also have members of the media. It's not just like randos on Twitter. It's not even people like Julie Kelly, who's this unhinged right-wing whack job on Twitter. You have professional journalists, people like Brett Baer on the Fox the Fox News network. You also have Fox News hosts, who are propagandists that still shouldn't be saying it, even though they're in the bag for Trump, like Sean Hannity, Jesse Waters, Laura Ingraham, and others as well. But again, you have right-wing journalists running with this. Again, Brett Baer and the Fox, the straight news part of the Fox thing, it was a colossal disappointment. And yeah, to your point, so it's part of standard operating procedure for 24 years. It's been pre-filled on every form involving search warrants and consensual searches for 24 years since September 11th or since 2000. It was pre-filled in, so it's not like Biden took the form and like, yeah, I'm going to add this extra part as a post-it note. It was also included in the language used for President Biden's search when the FBI went to Delaware and searched the president's home for classified documents. So is Biden trying to assassinate himself? Like, what's the argument here?
Yeah.
The FBI coordinated deliberately with the Secret Service to let them know, number one, that they were coming, and number two, that they could pick a day where Trump wasn't there. They went in plain clothes to avoid embarrassing Trump rather than like kick down the door in full kit, as you would say. So they bent, again, even in this, the FBI bent over backwards to accommodate Trump, 100%. And yet, I've seen no formal retractions on Fox News. They just like stopped talking about it. At least the straight news part has, after again signal boosting the conspiracy theories. And wow, this is really weird and unhinged. Like this is unusual. This is irresponsible. But as you say, Trump wasn't even in the same state. But also the funny thing for me, and I made a point of this on my video, on a video of mine covering this. What's extra funny about this is you take everything they say at face value, which you shouldn't. You should MAGA to your viewers. I would just say, if any of you operate under the belief that you're obligated to show the modern day Republican Party the benefit of the doubt, you're not. You're not. They have disgraced themselves so utterly that I think it's perfectly fair to meet anything they say with immediate skepticism and the presumption of bad faith. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, you choose not to. Donald Trump and his attorneys argued in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and then the United States Supreme Court that presidents should have legal immunity, absolute legal immunity, for trying to assassinate political rivals. So what this means is, if you take their conspiracy theory at face value, they should. Can we curse on this show?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
No.
I curse all the
then
time.
They should. Cool. Then they should shut the fuck up, because that just means the sitting president was availing himself of the very right that they claimed in front of the United States Supreme Court that presidents should have.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up. You have, not only are you wrong on the facts, not only are you lying through your teeth, but even if I grant you all of that, you have no room to complain. Mm-hmm. This is what you wanted. You argued for this. Of course, this goes to show they really don't want presidents to have the right to assassinate their political rivals. They want Trump to have the right to assassinate political rivals because, friends, it's a cult. It's an authoritarian cult that deserves neither your respect nor your grace. They deserve contempt as a default, as far as I'm concerned. And this is further proof of that. Obviously, no president, Republican or Democrat, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, should be absolutely legally immune for trying to, assassinate a political rival. But this just goes to show, once again, this is how the cult works. They indulge in conspiracy theories. They indulge in ridiculous notions of absolute presidential immunity, and they're fundraising off of it. They just it's pure outcome orientation. They want Trump to win the election. They want Trump to avoid any legal accountability, and they'll say something on Monday, completely contradict themselves on Wednesday, contradict themselves a third time by Friday, and then go back to the thing they said on Monday, the following Monday, and rinse and repeat. Take none of it seriously. Don't treat any of it with good faith. And again, this is yet another reason why we have to vote these people out in every election, in every jurisdiction, in every state possible. There is no room in a functioning society for MAGA Republicans to have power. They can't be trusted with it.
So I sometimes speak with people that are, MAGA. Some of them I'm very close friends with. We just usually don't talk politics and stuff like that. So I feel like, I can have a conversation with them about this. Some of them actually are good faith. We just have very, very degrees of points of view. Like they hate my politics. I don't like their politics either. It's very simple. But when I look at this, and when they say, well, what about Biden? Whenever I bring up how corrupt Trump is, they say, well, what about Biden? What about Biden? They say, well, would you be okay with Biden if he's corrupt? Yeah, go for it. But so far, what I find most interesting about this concept is that people have proof of Biden being corrupt, right? When Jared Moskowitz called the bluff of, James Comer and Jim Jordan, okay, let's vote for impeachment. they had nothing to say about that, essentially. But people are still so convinced about that. But anytime you bring up the corruption of Donald Trump, they're like, la, 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 la. No, he's not corrupt. He's the most honest politician out there. If he said that, he didn't mean it. He was being hyperbolic. He's just joking. But it's just like they make excuses. And like when I say handle with kid gloves, I've never, ever seen a president handled with so much delicate care. Could you imagine, like, if the Republicans were in Congress and the Senate and Barack Obama had the exact same thing, they would be losing their minds. Like, oh my God, this guy's they already think he's the worst guy ever. Like
he wore he
wore a tan suit?
He wore a tan suit, ate Dijon mustard, and was a black guy. So that's the unholy trinity as far as a lot of these Republicans are concerned. Of course, that's I think that's a great thing to point out. That's my general proposition to people who complain about this. Okay, first things first, you need to imagine how you would react if the shoe was on the other foot. And if your reaction would not be consistent, then it's a you problem, not an ethics problem.
Sure.
That's why I say I agree that, listen, no president should have absolute legal immunity for anything. I think that's gross. My guy, or the guy rather that I support for president, Joe Biden, is the president. So it would be painfully easy for me, or perfectly easy for me, to say, yeah, actually that whole absolute legal immunity thing, that's super cool because the guy on my team is president. But here I am, while the guy on my team is president, saying, hell no. And if Joe Biden ever said that, or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or any future Democratic president said, yeah, I should have absolute legal immunity for anything I do while in office, I would be apoplectic. I might even change my party, because that is such a defiance of a core foundation of this country, this idea that we don't have a sovereign. In Great Britain, the king is sovereign. Even now, King Charles is sovereign. So technically, on paper, King Charles could not be prosecuted for any crime because he is the sovereign, he is the crown, and the crown is the source of law. That's why they say His Majesty's government, His Majesty's armed forces. Yep. The military swears allegiance. Your counterparts in the British military, they don't take an oath to the Constitution. They don't take an oath to Parliament. They swear allegiance to the monarch. It was Queen Elizabeth, now it's King Charles. We staged a revolution to get away from that. Yep. We say, listen, we have a chief executive. And the chief executive is powerful, but the chief executive is not sovereign. The chief executive is not a monarch. The chief executive is supposed to be constrained by separations of powers and checks and balances. And by the way, Donald Trump is not the chief executive. He is a former chief executive. So whatever protections and privileges should be afforded to him as a sitting president, they should go away, again, except Secret Service details, to the stuff which has been codified into law. And yet MAGA Republicans presume like he is the president and that the president is king, but only when Trump is president. Biden's president, then no, we take that back. It's super gross and inconsistent. Last thing I'll say is my very blunt condemnation of MAGA as a movement. I do want to be clear about this. So again, I was born in rural northeastern Kentucky. Mm-hmm. That's MAGA land. I spent most of my life in rural Kentucky. That's MAGA land. Okay, most of my family members and friends are Republican, and many of them are MAGA. I love them. Mm-hmm. I love them. I cherish them. But as a movement, I do believe it's a cult.
Yes.
And as a movement, I do believe, and again, this is not saying that every single Republican, but just collectively, it's a bad faith authoritarian political body. And I don't trust the modern day Republican Party with power. I've seen no evidence of. I've seen the fact that they capitulate to Trump even now. You have Republican lawmakers now, Tim Scott, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, publicly saying that they will not commit to accepting the results of the 2024 election.
Which is your next topic, actually.
Yes, right. I forgot about that. But this is what I mean. This stuff is dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so getting back to your topic, this is further proof, because I have no doubt that there are people who will watch Fox News, see Trump's truths on Drive Central, and listen to what Marjorie Taylor Greene has to say, and they'll be, oh my God, the deep state is literally trying to kill Donald Trump. And we don't need any of that conspiracy theory right now. The situation's already hot enough.
Exactly. But again, this is the kind of stuff that Trump loves. He loves the attention. When people say, oh my God, they're doing such terrible things to Trump, he loves this. He lives for it. This is like, because a few weeks ago when Truth Social was just soaring in the stock market, the guest and I talked about this, and we said, he's a terrible businessman, but he's great at marketing. I mean, my God, he can grade a pair of shoes that people will buy for $9,000. He's great at marketing. Like, he can sell his name and people will buy it. It could be like a turd sandwich, but it has Trump on it. Somebody will buy it. And like, it's absolutely brilliant. But at the same time, like, that's the thing that's scary about it, is because whatever he says, he could never possibly tell a lie. And he knows people are going to click on this. He knows people are going to be talking about this, and he knows it's going to affect people's judgment, essentially, because he always used the term, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. And people believe that. And it's just, it boggles my mind, because I've read multiple books on his presidency, him as a person, and it's all very consistent. Everything that he says, like, there are some things that I know he's full of shit on, but there are some things that I take very, very seriously on. And when you have somebody that says, I deserve full immunity, okay, does that mean Biden? Why isn't Biden granting himself full immunity right now?
No, it's different. That's different, Alex. You can't do this. This is a Trump special immunity, because Trump's a special boy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like, then in that case, every president needs to grant themselves special immunity, but they don't. It's because, every president, whether people like them or not, have established a set of precedents. Like, for example, there's a peaceful transition of power, except for this last election. No peaceful transfer of power. There was times where they couldn't receive classified intel briefings because there was no peaceful transfer of power. He set a precedence by not attending the inauguration for his successor because he refuses to accept that he lost the election. Even though Trump does know he lost the election, he just cannot accept that, because then he feels like his base will probably turn against him. But the reason why this is such a big deal, and the reason why I can't stress this enough, it's because he knows people are listening. Until his entire base realizes, holy shit, I can't believe I listened to this fucking guy. Because the second that his base turns away from him, that's going to be the thing that will eventually kill his image. Because then he's just going to wither away in Mar-a-Lago for the rest of his life, basically. It's that image, it's that vanity, it's that love that he has. That's what he feeds off of that. And that's why he's just so good, because this buys clicks. It's all about the marketing. That's all this is about. It's not because he's actually afraid of his safety. It's because of the marketing. The marketing is the most important thing. Oh my God, the judge is not going to let me see my son graduate. Marketing. He does this because it's a marketing strategy for him. That's what he sees. He plays the marketing long game. This is nothing but a marketing campaign for him. And he knows it because people are going to buy into it.
Yeah, he's literally fundraising off of all this stuff. This particular conspiracy theory, even like, help protect me from the deep state, donate $5 to, MAGAJesus.com or whatever it is. It's very much true. And it's terrifying that he's gotten as far as he has. I mean, the last thing I'll say on this is Trump. People talk about Trump being a winner and good for the Republican Party. What's hilarious is you take principles and values out of the equation. Just look at, the results. Trump won in 2016, sure, but he lost the 2018 midterms. He lost the 2020 presidential election, and then he lost the 2021 special elections for the Senate. They basically lost the midterms in 2022, given the headwinds that they had at their disposal. They lost most of the special elections in 2023. And so, like, Trump's win-loss record since he has led the Republican Party has been atrocious. He had one good, he's that guy, he's that like suburban dad in his 50s talking about that one high school championship that he won on the football team, and he can't let it go. But every other aspect of his life has been a dismal failure. And he's so much of a narcissist that he has to rewrite history. But yeah, that's it's really scary that he is as effective at mobilizing this cult the way that he has. And I think the implications of that will be profoundly dangerous for this country long after Trump, because it's not a spell. It's not like, Trump's 78 years old. He's very unhealthy, he has a terrible diet. He will eventually pass away. And I don't think, there's going to be like some spell lifted. I think there are going to be other people trying to create themselves or recreate themselves in his image to, become the next divine figure in the MAGA cult. I think we're going to be stuck with this for maybe even a generation.
Liz Cheney said it best before we move to the next topic, is like, one day Donald Trump will be gone, but your dishonor is going to remain. And I thought that was like the most true statement. Why don't you go ahead and move on to your last topic, because I know you're short for time.
Yeah, I'm waiting back to hear from my girlfriend right now. Gotcha. So my last topic is, it's Ted Cruz, but Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, as well. There are an increasing number of Republican senators that, when asked by journalists, will you commit to accepting the results of the upcoming election, they refuse. They'll either hedge or they'll just say, in Tim Scott's case, it was really scary. He just said, I know that Donald Trump will be elected the 47th president of the United States. That's my answer. When asked repeatedly, I know Donald Trump will be elected the 47th president of the United States. Well, sir, that's not my question. I know that, and so it's this disturbing thing coming not again from, it's crazy to hear this stuff from everyday American citizens, but you're talking about people who wield enormous power. Again, we should have higher standards for elected officials because they wield power, they're privy to information and resources that we're not. And for them to behave this way when they have the power and responsibility and knowledge to do otherwise is profoundly dangerous. And again, it's an increasing number of them. It's not just one or two. It seems like with every passing day, you have Republicans saying this stuff, and it's pretty scary.
Absolutely. And, it's just, I really wonder what kind of dirt Trump has on them. And I don't think it's so much dirt. It's because without Trump's endorsement, they would get slaughtered. Like in the elections, they might get primaried. Look what happened to Mitt Romney. Look what happened to Liz Cheney. Everybody that basically went on the January 6th committee is no longer in office. I mean, if they're Republicans, that is. They are no longer in office. Adam Kinzinger, to his credit, said, I'm just not going to run for election. But Liz Cheney ran for re-election, and she got bashed. I mean, she's mad.
Yeah. Kinzinger, I was just going to say, he knew that he was probably going to lose. So he dipped out. Liz Cheney tried to put up a fight, but ultimately lost, to your point.
Yeah, but Ted Cruz, I have little to no respect for Ted Cruz whatsoever. Any man that insults my wife, I'm not going to kiss their ass. I don't give a shit. It does not fucking matter. And Nikki Haley, she just turned tail as well. Her husband was insulted. Her husband's in the military as well. He was being insulted, and she says, you know what? Biden's a bigger evil. Biden never insulted your husband, so you're going to turn to the guy that insulted you. And it's just the fact that they can't answer that direct question is just so telling. And you're right, it's 100% frightening because he's got these guys so shook. And here's the amazing thing. One of the books I read, it was during the Pennsylvania Senate race between John Fetterman and Dr. Oz, right? Mm-hmm. The guy, Dr. Oz, was really close to losing because Trump had endorsed one of his rivals in the Republican Party, right? Mm-hmm. He had endorsed him. But because this guy refused to apologize to Trump by saying that the election was not stolen, Trump says, if you don't apologize, if you don't go on TV right now and say that I won the election, you're going to lose my endorsement. He says, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Then he endorses Dr. Oz, and Dr. Oz got the nomination. That's just how powerful this movement really is. Because they know for a fact, if they say anything otherwise, like, I can only imagine, could you imagine, like, if there's like a recording of Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, yeah, I know Trump lost the election, basically. Can you imagine like how quick he would turn on her and basically she would lose all endorsements? I mean, that's the impact he has.
Loyalty only works one way with Trump. He expects it and will not get it. And for him, it's situational. There was another situation where a Republican congresswoman who I think in her own way, she might even be more unhinged than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Because I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is scary, but she's also genuinely stupid, and I believe she's a firm believer in the crazy things that she says. I don't think she is I think she's not a liar in the way that other Republicans are. I think she's just deluded and stupid and dangerous. But then you have people like Elise Stefanik, who she's a congresswoman from New York. She used to criticize Donald Trump. She was seen as a moderate. Adam Kinzinger, whom you've mentioned, former Republican congressman, talked about how sane and reasonable she used to be and how they got along really well. And now, if you see her now, I mean, man, it's like the Stepford wife. She's got this weird, creepy smile on her face, and she doesn't blink, and her pupils are blown out anytime she's talking about Trump because it's like the programming takes over. But she's too smart for that. She's just doing it because she understands that that's currency within her party. If she wants to get anywhere, do anything as a Republican, the currency is loyalty to Trump and Trump's favor, which, as you point out, is very mercurial. So she had an interview about a week ago on Fox News, Home Turf Advantage. And the host, Shannon Bream, was like, hey, listen, you used to talk shit about Trump. People want to know what changed. And the interview went viral because Elise Stefanik started shouting, and she's like, "It's so irresponsible of you to just be reading these quotes, and how dare you?" And you could just see the visible panic because she's like, "Holy shit, what if Trump sees this? What if Donald Trump watches this interview and sees this conservative reporter on a conservative news network, which is pretty loyal to the right wing and even to Trump, just reading quotes from shit I have said?" Like, not even making it up, not casting aspersions, just reading stuff I've said from years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What if Trump sees that? And you can see the full-blown, I support Donald Trump, and how dare you, and just a meltdown on screen. And again, I made fun of her for it, and I think as a general proposition, I think it's really, really good. I think it's morally right to be mean to Republican politicians because they're the worst. It's okay to bully bullies as long as you do it within the confines of the law. But it's also kind of sad because it's like, lady, you're too smart for this. Like you're an accomplished woman. You're an accomplished person. You know, why are you debasing yourself and disgracing yourself? It's the same thing with Cruz and Tim Scott and others. Now, Cruz is legendarily unlikable. Lindsey Graham, his colleague, famously said that if you were to murder Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and your trial was in the Senate would not convict you because Ted Cruz is despised by even his fellow Republicans. And again, Ted Cruz isn't an idiot. You know, he's Harvard educated. He's litigated in front of the United States Supreme Court. He's a smart guy.
Yep.
But he's making this decision deliberately. And that's the scary thing. No limiting principle, which goes back to my anxiety about allowing Republicans to win, not voting against Republicans in every election and seeing them take power. The institutions that we have in this country are not self-sufficient. They're not run by some sort of artificial superintelligence. They're not divinely written or divinely crafted. This isn't Harry Potter. It's not Lord of the Rings. Our institutions are comprised of people. Mm-hmm. And the currency that keeps these institutions alive are good faith. And good faith has to be reciprocal. And if you have people in positions of power that act in bad faith, they can easily break our constitutional institutions. And that's what we're seeing now is Trump, as stupid as he can be, the people around him who want to use him as a tool for change have persuaded him, like, hey, listen, the institutions, the safeguards, they stopped you last time. So what do we have to do? We have to get people in those institutions to change and become loyal to you, or we need to replace them with people who are loyal to you. And then the institutions can't block you. So I get so fed up when Republicans and centrists say, you don't need to worry about Trump. He tried last time. He failed. The guardrails held. It's like if you have a truck, think of literal guardrails, right? So you're on a road, an F-150 plows into the guardrails on a highway, and let's say the guardrails hold. Well, do you toss a fresh set of keys to a new F-150 to the same driver and say, try to plow it again? No, you take his keys away from him, you take him home, you extract the truck from the guardrails, you reinforce the guardrails, and you pay closer attention. So the metaphor to me doesn't make any sense. This idea that just trust that guardrails hold and then do nothing about it and just give the person a second shot at it, stupid stuff. And that's what we're seeing from this iteration of the GOP.
So when people say, well, why did he do it last time? It's because it was his first time ever running for, technically, it was actually his second time running for president because, remember, back in 2000, he ran for the Reform Party, but he just got nowhere. But this time, he paid attention to, how he actually could get elected. He hired people. Now, the best person that I thought he hired for Secretary of Defense was James Mattis.
Mad Dog.
I love Mattis. I actually saw him speak in person at Fort Benning. Really awesome guy, Very, very articulate and very smart. Well, anyway, the reason why, because the guardrails were there. Trump just elected people that he felt, okay, this person would be good for me. But when those people told him no, he did not like that. When Mike Pence went against him, he says it was a big mistake bringing Mike Pence in. The next time, should he get reelected, God forbid, he's only going to hire people that will say yes, sir, to him. That's it. He wants an army of yes men and women. That's what he wants. He wants undying, fettered loyalty to him and to him alone. And that's what people need to understand. I mean, your guardrail reference is 100% correct. And I just think, sometimes people just need to be direct, this is why it's dangerous. He's already stated he only wants people that would be loyal to him. And to your point, we need more attack dogs in Congress. And I think, the best one we have right now, Jasmine Crockett. She is awesome. Like, she does not take shit from anybody. But people are threatened by her because, mostly, I think it's because, she's a woman and she's a black woman. They think that she's a DEI hire. She's not. She's
an outspoken black woman,
Exactly.
too, which is the thing they hate the most.
Yeah. And I truly do believe that. People's like, oh, she talks ghetto. No, she doesn't. You just don't like the fact that she doesn't take shit from you. Democrats for like the longest time would be like, we gotta, let's go along, play along to get along kind of deal. We need some people that are gonna, kiss my ass. I'm not gonna take your shit from you. And she proved that too after Marge made that comment about the fake eyelashes, and then she came back with the body built back bitch or whatever, butch person.
Yeah,
and that was clever. I mean, it really just hit the nail home. But then, whoever it was, like Luna tried to come back and say, "Oh my God, that's so offensive." It's no more offensive than what Marge said, essentially. But
and Crockett was clever about it too, because she's much smarter than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh yeah,
she number one didn't fire back immediately.
Mm-hmm.
She allowed Comer the opportunity as chairman to do the thing he should have done, which is strike her words from the record, Marjorie's, and kick her out of the hearing. So if a congressperson's words are struck, what's supposed to happen is that they're supposed to basically leave the room for the day and not contribute. And make them apologize too. So it's strike the words, make them apologize, and then say, hey, listen, you can come back tomorrow.
Yep.
And instead, they just struck her words from the record and didn't make her apologize and didn't make her leave, because Comer needed her votes because of that razor-thin margin in order to pass the motion to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt. So Crockett gives Comer the opportunity to do the right thing. Comer doesn't do the right thing. And then even then, Crockett is very clever because she's an educated attorney. She says, listen, so just so I understand the rules of decorum, if someone were to make reference to a bleach blonde, bad butch body or bad built butch body, whatever it was, would that be considered decorum? She never said specifically that was Marjorie Taylor Greene. So even then, she was very clever about it. But to your point, yes, I am a firm believer. Let me say this first.
Sure.
Getting back to what you said about General Mattis, yes, there were competent people in the Trump administration. The problem was they didn't make it very far because, they were fired shortly thereafter because Trump himself is incompetent. And this is a point that I try to make in debates, and I encourage in conversations and videos and debates, all the above. And I encourage others to do it as well, which is, you're right. The president, when picking cabinet officials, they serve at the pleasure of the president. They can fire. Right now, President Biden could fire any of his cabinet. He doesn't need a reason. They're not subject to employee protections. They can be fired at will. Same thing with Trump.
Yeah.
And cabinet officials are supposed to get the consent of the Senate before they get their job. So some people say you don't have to worry about a second Trump administration, because if you pick someone crazy like Marjorie Taylor Greene as Secretary of Defense or whatever, the Senate will say no. The problem is, number one, I don't believe that if there's a Republican Senate. Number two, even if I did, the president can appoint what's called acting officials, that what they're basically, you slap acting in front of it and they get to serve as the de facto Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. Trump did that throughout his Mark Esper was an acting Secretary of Defense. So there's that. Like you said, he'll pick people whose only currency is loyalty. And the other thing to point out is what Donald Trump has in terms of the number of people who worked closely for him, now saying that he's not fit for office. This to me is further proof that MAGA is an irrational cult, because imagine you're hiring somebody for a role, you get a resume, you look at their resume, it sucks, but you just go ahead and you call their previous employer, and all of their coworkers who work closely with them, the vast majority say, do not hire this person. They're going to screw up your company. You wouldn't hire them. You really would. There's no you just wouldn't hire them. But what we have is something very analogous with Trump, and yet he's got even odds of taking the White House at the moment because MAGA is not thinking rationally about this. And it's just true. It's very cultish. Anthony Scaramucci, who used to be Donald Trump's White House communications director, he put it like this. He goes, there are 40 of us, cabinet officials, senior staff, people who didn't just hear about Donald Trump, who worked for him and worked for him directly. Scaramucci, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, we know him better than you, MAGA. You've never met him. We know him. We are informed. You're not. So we're right and you're wrong. And we're telling you, as people who know better, don't vote for him because we know more than you. We worked for him. We're not Democrats. We're not never Trumpers. We are former Trumpers who knew the guy and worked for the guy directly. And so he said, this is where I said, I thought it was brilliant. He goes, imagine there are 40 executives of a pharmaceutical company, and they come out and say, do not take the pill of our pharmaceutical company. It will kill you. Would people take the pill? Probably not. If you had 40 executives of an auto manufacturer say, do not buy our car, it will kill you. Would you buy the car? Probably not. But something doesn't click when it comes to this. Biden and Democrats don't have this problem, right? As much, I'm sure, disagreements as there may be, President Biden, you don't have former cabinet officials and staff saying this guy's an idiot or this guy's a narcissist or this guy's corrupt. You don't have that. The fact that so many from Trump are saying this about him, to me, it's the ultimate silver bullet. I would encourage you the next time you talk to a Republican, a MAGA Republican, somebody on this show or whatever, I think that's important to make them address it. Explain to me, why in every other situation you would take at face value the words of people who know better, who know this person, who know this thing. You would not hire somebody whose close references say don't hire them. Why is this the exception? And then the other thing I would say is that for the Democrats, I also want the Democrats to take the approach of Jared Moskowitz and Jasmine Crockett and Dan Goldman and Maxwell Frost, these freshman Democrats who are really bringing the fire and the heat. AOC brought it, and they're carrying on that tradition. And you see it in these hearings. They're even influencing the likes of Jamie Raskin, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. He's a Democrat, constitutional scholar, a master rhetorician. And even he is recognizing that, what? We need to bring the fire. We need to start pushing back. The question is, when Democrats take power, will they keep that mindset, or do they think that's something they? We're not just going to cross our fingers and hope that they play nice. Please, no. We're going to tell them the way it's going to be. We are going to investigate Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And when they complain, we're going to say, we don't want to hear it. You set the standard for this. You are so used to taking sucker punches at us because we fight with one hand tied behind our back. No, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to play the game like you. And unfortunately for you, we're better at it because Democratic politicians are smarter than Republican politicians. They have Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We have people say, well, you guys have AOC. AOC on her worst day is better, is smarter, is just superior to the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene. They are at a colossal disadvantage in terms of combined competence. So that's my hope.
Absolutely. I don't really know how I can beat that, honestly, like what you just said. I mean, it's like spot on. But we need to remember something, though. Last year's Congress was the worst Congress in recent history. Like, they passed hardly any legislation whatsoever. Usually they pass on average like 200 bills. They passed like less than 50. I mean, it's just like, what does that tell you, essentially? I mean, that's like, and this is why it's so important. Like, this is why voting does matter. This is why I think people need to be more educated. But it's just, politics is a very saturated topic, and people are just, it's just like they're overpowered by it. And some people just get sick and tired of it. And I get that. I understand it completely. But it's so important for people to get involved, educate themselves on who who the candidate is. But at the end of the day, it's not really going to matter. Some people are just going to vote strictly Democrat or strictly Republican. It's their vote at the end of the day. And that's the only way to look at it, though.
Yeah. So what I would say is, it's the least productive iteration of Congress since the Great Depression. It's on track to conclude as the least productive iteration of Congress since the Civil War. And that's because of Republicans. That's exclusively because of Republicans. When Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat, was Speaker of the House and divided government under Donald Trump, the House and Congress in general were more productive, right? So think about that. Nancy Pelosi, who hated Trump, Trump hated her. She tried to impeach him twice. That's how much they despise each other. They were still able to get more done together because Democrats will act in good faith, even with Donald Trump, than Republicans will with President Biden. That again, to me, is another stark contrast, which is so important to hammer home. The very year that Republicans tried to impeach Donald Trump for his attempt to extort Vladimir Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, in exchange for congressionally approved foreign aid, that same year was an election year, 2020, And because a global crisis in the form of COVID hit, the same Democrats who tried to impeach Trump and were running against him in an election year, who thought he was evil and stupid and all these things, also worked with him to pass 2 major COVID stimulus bills, knowing in an election year that he would get the credit for it.
Yep.
So Democrats are not perfect. They're
Yeah.
not. I'm not saying that. I don't mean to suggest that you can't have a good faith criticism of the Democrats. But what I will say, and I'll die on this hill, Democrats as an institution, Democratic elected officials, are infinitely better at working in good faith with the opposition. They just are. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I believe sincerely that if there were a COVID-like situation under President Biden, Republicans would deliberately not work with him to hurt him politically in an election year. They would put politics above people, whereas with Trump, Democrats proved, as much as they despised him, they put people above politics. I think if there was a 9/11 style terrorist attack in the United States under a Democrat, the Republican politicians would not unite behind a Democratic president. That's something they expect of us when the shoe is on the other foot. When a Republican's in office and there's a crisis, you shut up and you fall in line. That was what they said during the Bush years. You can't criticize a sitting president. You're aiding and abetting the terrorists. I have no reason to believe that Republicans would take their own advice. I firmly believe, based on things they've said since during the Obama administration, during the Biden administration, that they would just use it as an opportunity to politically injure the sitting president. It's complete and total asymmetry. And that's something that I viciously fight back against. We need to pick a standard. If we're going to be patriots who love this country, then that means Republicans should be expected to as well. And that means when there's a Democratic president, you treat that Democratic president with respect. You say, Mr. President, you do whatever you do the same thing you expect from the opposition. And if you can't do it, then you shouldn't expect it of us. And Democrats have got to start resetting that sort of thing. And I think that this is a really good point, that Republicans can't govern. They can't. They refuse to work with Biden in an election year because they don't want to be seen as being politically beneficial to Biden. That is just something that Democrats don't do. When the shit hits the fan, when the rubber meets the road, they are willing to back a Republican president if they think it's the right thing to do, even if it's politically disadvantageous to them.
Well stated. Very, very well stated. So I think your time is pretty much like limited right now. So we'll go ahead and close up shop. So Jessiah, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I really did appreciate it because I learned a lot from you, and I like exchanges like this because that's why I do this podcast. I enjoy back and forth, and each of us has a different point of view to look at that. And I just think that you really articulated the position that everybody that votes Democrat needs to take this into consideration, especially this. I mean, we always say every year is a very important election year. This one is just as important. So, but before I close out, I want everybody to remember tomorrow is Memorial Day. Now, I want everybody to understand something, and I mean this with all due respect. Memorial Day is not a happy occasion. Memorial Day is us remembering those that never made it home. There are families that were given a notification that their loved one was killed in action or was, and they are not going to be coming home. It's a very somber occasion. And just remember, it's not just like a 3-day weekend where people can have cookouts and barbecues, even though that's great. We have to remember something, that there are people that are celebrating Memorial Day completely different. I've lost a lot of friends in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I know what it's like to see things like this, and it's absolutely tragic. And, I actually did a notification one time. It wasn't combat related, but it's a hard thing to do. And it's even worse for those that receive that terrible news. So I just want everybody to remember that for Memorial Day, don't say Happy Memorial Day. Just say, let's remember the fallen, or just however way to put it. But let's just remember, there are veterans out there that say it's not a happy occasion. We lost a lot of friends. So I just want everybody to remember that, and I do definitely say that with all due respect. So anyway, Jessiah, any last thoughts before we go?
Yeah, a couple of things. Listen, I appreciate the conversation. Definitely, I love talking about this stuff and hearing as well alternate points of view. I would also say, with well said on Memorial Day, I'll also point out, since again we're talking about differences between the two parties and the importance of an election year, President Biden's PACT Act just recently saw its 1 millionth veteran who applied and received these enhanced health and medical benefits, and that was because of Biden and the Democrats. It was initially bipartisan, then Republicans opposed the bill to try to hurt Biden politically when he was about to pass a separate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, basically saying, hey, listen, if you do this other thing, we're going to screw this enhanced veterans health care package to spite you. So don't you do this other thing. And Biden actually won both days, in large part because comedian Jon Stewart,
Love Jon Stewart.
publicly shamed the Republicans for their dirty pool. So the party that says it's the pro-military party, the pro-veteran party, they're lying. The Democratic Party, again, for all its faults, cares infinitely more about America's veterans, and probably still not enough, but they care infinitely more than the Republican Party. And on Memorial Day, that's also something to contemplate as well, that if you care about veterans, and with an election coming up, how can you best assign your vote in a way which benefits veterans? I would say voting Democrat and keeping bad faith Republicans out of power would be a great way to do it. And then, yeah, you can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do this again sometime. It'd be fun.
Absolutely. I'd look forward to it. So, yeah, I got to pick your brain on something, but you got to go to dinner. I'll just send you a message later on down the line on something. So, but
perfect.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy your dinner, Josiah. Take care now.
I appreciate it. You have a great day. Thank you.
See ya.
See ya.